The world cheered his name, believing he built an empire from dust. Cameras followed his smile, sponsors lined his path, and every applause made his lies shine brighter. But behind that story stood a woman the world never saw. Imani Reed, the quiet force who built his first success, saved his projects, and trusted him with her heart and her work. When he erased her name from everything they created, he thought she'd disappear. But he forgot one thing, and she had the truth. Now, with nothing but evidence and courage, she is about to take back what was stolen, not for fame, but for justice that can't be bought or buried. They cheered his name. Lights followed his smile. On camera, he was everywhere. Speeches, photo ops, charity dinners. The story the city learned was simple and clean. A man who rose from nothing and built a miracle for his neighborhood. What the cameras never showed was the quiet woman who kept that miracle alive when there were no lights at all. Her name was Imani Reed. She never wanted fame. She only wanted fairness. Imani grew up in a small two-room house on the south side of Chicago. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father fixed cars in a garage that smelled of oil and stories. From them, she learned the value of steady work and the small pride of doing what must be done. At 15, she learned how to stitch a torn uniform, how to calm a fever, how to speak kindly when a patient felt scared. When she started a tiny clinic in an old rented storefront, she thought of it as a place to heal people who could not wait for hospitals or expensive care. She thought of it as a quiet answer to a loud problem. The clinic opened with 2 chairs, a donated cot, and medicines wrapped in paper. Neighbors walked in with coughs, with scraped knees, with worry and the kind of trust people give when they know someone is honest. Imani stayed late. She cooked soup for a child who could not eat, filled forms at midnight, taught a nurse how to write receipts so the records made sense. People began to call it Reed Community Care. The name was small, but it meant something. It belonged to the neighborhood and to the hands that healed it. Then Marcus Adams walked in. Marcus had a bright suit and a brighter smile. He arrived at the clinic with a promise and a camera crew. He wanted to support community work, he said, a phrase that sounded like help. At first, he asked only to fund a new machine or to arrange a charity night. Imani said yes because she believed help mattered more than suspicion. Marcus watched the clinic for weeks. He asked questions, he took notes, and he talked like a man who wanted to make change. He called her capable. He thanked her on camera. People who came to the clinic learned to smile at his praise and to trust the idea of a helper who looked like a hero in the press. Imani worked with him. She showed Marcus how the books were kept. She named the nurses and taught him the quiet parts of care. How to listen, how to hold a hand while someone cried. She trusted him more than she would ever tell anyone. Doing the work felt like breathing. Doing it with another person felt like arranging furniture in a room that would later be full of guests. Marcus promised donors. He promised more help. He promised the clinic would grow, that more children would get shots, that the kitchen would feed more people. His voice was smooth and steady. People heard the promise and believed him. For a long time, everything was good. A new exam table arrived. A volunteer from a university came with fresh supplies. The clinic took on a few more patients each month. Imani balanced the books and wrote letters to local officials. She handed Marcus a list of needs. He would stand on stage and thank the people who had helped him build change. He always used the word I. People began to clap when he spoke. Cameras loved a clean story. One man, one mission, a hero. The danger did not arrive as a shout. It moved like cold water, slow and silent. One morning, Imani opened her mail and found a letter sealed with a different name. It was a notice about the lease. The clinic must move. Or the lease would be transferred to a management company. And the words on the paper were strange and foreign, for something that had always belonged to the neighborhood. A signature ran across the bottom, Marcus Adams. The paper said the clinic had been folded into a non-profit that listed him as founder. It said donors had given to a new enterprise. The names that once read Reed Community Care now included his and his only. Imani read the lines again and again like a prayer gone wrong. Her chest tightened. She called a nurse who had been with her since the first week. Naomi's voice was small on the other end. She had noticed bills changed and funds redirected. A local volunteer, too, mentioned a meeting where Marcus had casually said, "We'll rebrand it under my foundation." The volunteer had clapped. No one thought to ask which hands had done the heavy lifting. No one thought to ask why the signatures included a name that had not belonged to the clinic. For a moment, Imani imagined she had missed something. Maybe a legal form was misplaced. Maybe Marcus had meant well and made a bureaucratic mistake. She wanted an answer that would make the ache go away. She walked through the rooms she had cleaned for years and touched the worn edge of the reception desk. Patients came in while she stood there, and their faces were blind to the paper that threatened to change everything. A little boy raised his sleeve for a shot. Imani smiled and did the job she knew without thinking. But the smile did not reach the hollow tightening in her chest. That night the city hummed with distant traffic and the faint braying of late-night radios. Imani sat at the kitchen table with a lamp that gave a small, honest circle of light. She spread the clinic papers out like a puzzle. Months of receipts, volunteer notes, the original rental agreement she had kept carefully folded for years. She read each line and matched it to memory. Her hands moved slowly and sure. She had a ledger of the early donations. She had a stack of names who had come to help in the first weeks. She could write down every patient who had sat on the old cot. The papers were small proof of a long, quiet truth. Her mind filled with the images she had rehearsed 100 times in her head. The clinic rebuilt as it had been, children safe, truth told. But she also felt a new heat rise inside. Not the hot fury of a woman shouting in public, but the slow, certain burn of someone who would not accept being erased. This was not about money or applause. This was about a record. A straight line between hands that worked and words that called it theirs. If she lost that line, the story the city would remember would be false. She could not let that happen. Imani closed the folder and put it in her bag. She would not run to the camera. She would not shout in the street. She would do what she had always done, make a plan and keep each foot steady on the ground. She would gather the facts. She would find the people who had seen him sign the papers. She would collect the receipts. She would be patient. Justice, she had learned watching her parents struggle and survive, is often quieter than anger. It takes time, but it holds. Outside, through the thin window, a bus coughs by and a distant siren fades. The small light on the table makes a bright dot on the edge of the papers. In that glow, she made a choice that would change everything. Not for fame, not for revenge that drinks applause, but for the truth that belongs to those who do the work with honest hands. The next morning, Chicago's sky was the color of cold metal. Imani Reed walked to her clinic early, the street still quiet except for the hum of buses. She always liked those hours before the city fully woke, when she could hear her own thoughts, when she could pretend that the world was still kind. But this morning, something felt different. The wind felt heavy, like it carried secrets she hadn't asked for. When she reached the clinic, Marcus's name was already on the new sign. Adams Foundation Health Center. The white letters looked bright and proud against the wall she once painted with her own hands. For a long moment, Imani stood still. People passed her without looking twice. A woman who used to call her Miss Reed smiled at the sign and whispered to her child, "See? Mr. Marcus really helping folks." Imani felt her throat tighten. Her name, her story, it was gone. Inside, the front desk had been rearranged. A young intern she didn't know greeted her awkwardly. "Oh, hi, you must be, one of the assistants?" The word assistant hit her harder than she expected. She smiled weakly. "I'm Imani, I used to run this place." The intern blinked, confused. "Oh, Mr. Marcus said you were stepping away. It's such a nice thing he's doing, keeping it open for the community." Each word was a knife that twisted. Imani looked around. The walls had new posters with Marcus's face, smiling, arms crossed, words printed under it, building hope, changing lives. She had written that slogan 2 years ago on a grant proposal he had once ignored. She walked into the old storage room, the one with cracked shelves and a smell of rubbing alcohol. Her desk was gone. Her ledgers, her handwritten notes, were missing. In their place sat boxes labeled Archive. She opened one. Inside were documents stamped with Adams Foundation. Her name was nowhere. Naomi, the head nurse, appeared at the doorway, worry on her face. "Imani," she whispered. "He told everyone you moved on to something bigger. He said he bought the clinic legally. Said you were fine with it." Imani's voice trembled. "Did he tell them whose name was on the lease? Did he tell them who signed every check for 6 years?" Naomi shook her head, tears in her eyes. No one wanted to ask. He's powerful now. Donors love him. The mayor even sent a thank you letter last week. For a long time, Imani couldn't speak. Her hands rested on the box as if she could squeeze the truth back into it. "They clapped for him," she murmured. "They don't even know what they're cheering for." That night, she went home to her small apartment above a laundromat. The sound of washing machines filled the silence. She placed her purse on the counter and took out the folder, the one with all her old records. Each paper now felt like a piece of her heartbeat. She ran her fingers across the ink of her name, faded but real. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Imani, we need to talk. Let's not make this ugly. You'll always be respected. Just let it go." She stared at the message until the words blurred. Let it go. Those 3 words carried the weight of every betrayal she had ever seen in her community. Every time someone took credit for the quiet hands that built things. Every time power buried humility, she replied simply, "We will talk, but not the way you think." 2 days later, she visited the neighborhood law center. The lawyer, a young man named Jamal Wright, looked through her papers carefully. His office was small, his tie slightly crooked, but his eyes were kind. "Ms. Reed," he said after reading everything, "you've got a case. He transferred property without your consent. You have signatures, receipts, and the original registration." Imani leaned forward. "Can we win?" he sighed. "Winning takes time. He's rich, connected. He'll drag it out, maybe try to scare you. But if you want the truth, I'll help you fight." Imani nodded. "I'm not scared of time." That night she couldn't sleep. She thought about her mother, who once told her, "When people steal your kindness, don't let them steal your courage too." She whispered that to herself until morning. Weeks passed. Marcus started appearing on television more often. He gave speeches about community care and inspired leadership. The city gave him an award. He thanked the strong women who taught me compassion. He never said her name. Each time Imani saw his face on screen, her anger grew quieter, sharper, like a blade being honed. She didn't want to scream at him in public. She wanted to prove him wrong, to make the truth stand where lies had lived. She began collecting everything: old photos, volunteer rosters, text messages, even notes written on napkins. Naomi helped, and so did a few old patients who remembered who truly ran the clinic. "Ms. Reed," said one elderly man, handing her a worn receipt, "I still remember you sitting by my bed when I couldn't pay. You didn't ask for my name on a camera. You just helped." Imani smiled softly. "That's the story I want the world to remember." Then came the first threat. A man in a suit delivered a letter, Marcus's lawyer. "Cease and desist," it read. "You are attempting to defame the Adams Foundation. Any public statement will be met with legal action." Imani folded the letter and placed it in her folder of proof. "Add this too," she told Jamal. "Every scare tactic is part of the story now." Jamal smiled faintly. "You're calmer than most people I've met." "Calm is the only thing they don't know how to fight," she said. One evening, as the sun bled gold through her window, she walked to the old clinic after hours. The lights inside glowed bright, nurses laughing, cameras being set up. Marcus was there, shaking hands with a local reporter. When he saw her standing at the door, his smile faltered for half a second. He walked over, his voice smooth. "Imani, you should be proud. Look at what we've built." She met his gaze steadily. "You mean what I built, and what you renamed." He chuckled, trying to keep his charm. "Come on, this is bigger than both of us. Donors need a face. You know how the game works." "I wasn't playing," she said softly. The camera light flashed nearby. Marcus straightened his tie and whispered, "Don't do this. You'll only make yourself look bitter." Imani smiled, calm but unyielding. "Then let's see who bitterness favors. The liar or the one with proof?" She turned and walked out before he could answer. The cold night air hit her face like truth itself, sharp, honest, and necessary. That was the moment she stopped being silent. She didn't want revenge that screamed. She wanted justice that endured, and from that night forward, every step she took would be toward that quiet, unstoppable truth. Justice, Imani learned, doesn't arrive with noise. It comes with pages, patience, and proof. Every evening after work, she sat at her kitchen table, a mug of black coffee growing cold beside her, and sorted through her evidence. One side of the table held the past: yellowed papers, receipts, clinic registration forms bearing her name. The other side held the present: printed photos of Marcus standing before the cameras claiming the same story as his own. Between them lay the truth, quiet but alive. She bought a large binder from a dollar store and began to fill it carefully. Each sheet went into a clear plastic sleeve. Each page carried a piece of her heartbeat. At the top, she labeled it the Reed file. Her first step was to prove ownership. The clinic's first lease was signed under her name. She visited the local property office downtown, an old building with flickering lights and stacks of paper that smelled of dust and ink. The clerk looked bored until she showed the old rental agreement. "This is 6 years old," he said, squinting. "The current lease lists Adams Foundation as tenant." "Can you tell me when that change was made?" she asked. He flipped through his computer. "Last December. Transferred under a new LLC. Same address, different owner." Imani felt her stomach twist. That was the month Marcus had promised to handle the renewal. She thanked the clerk and copied the digital record onto a USB drive. Proof. Back at home, she placed it into her binder. Each small victory was a spark. Each spark lit the next step. Naomi joined her most nights. They sat on the floor surrounded by papers, laptops, and memories. "You know," Naomi said softly, "he didn't just take the clinic. He took your voice. He tells your stories now as if you never existed." Imani nodded slowly. "Then we'll make the truth louder, not with shouting, but with facts." They called old volunteers. Some were hesitant, afraid to get involved. Others agreed to write statements. An older janitor named Raymond came by with an envelope of old photos. Imani helping children, cleaning floors, holding community events long before Marcus ever showed up. "I kept these," he said, "because I knew someday you'd need to remind them who started it all." Imani's eyes softened. "Thank you, Raymond. You just gave me back 6 years of truth." Meanwhile, Marcus was everywhere. His face smiled from billboards and news articles. He spoke at banquets, wore tailored suits, and received awards for innovation in healthcare. The city called him a hero. But behind that polished image, whispers began to spread. People noticed small cracks, stories that didn't match, names that didn't align. Journalists started asking quiet questions. One evening, Naomi showed Imani an online comment under a news video. "Didn't this clinic used to be called Reed Community Care?" Another replied, "Yeah, I remember a woman who ran it. Wonder where she went." Imani stared at those words for a long time. The internet could twist truth, but it could also reveal it. Her story was trying to surface. Jamal, her lawyer, guided her carefully. "We'll file an ownership claim," he said. "But first we need witnesses and documentation. He'll try to settle privately. Don't take it." Imani smiled faintly. "I'm not here for his money," Jamal nodded. "Good. Then we'll do it the hard way, the honest way." He arranged meetings with other attorneys, drafted letters, and submitted initial complaints to the local nonprofit bureau. It would take months, maybe a year. Marcus had deep pockets, but Imani had persistence. And persistence, she knew, was something he'd never understood. Weeks turned into months. Chicago shifted seasons. Rain slicked the streets, wind cut through coats, and the clinic's sign glowed through fog like a constant reminder. Imani watched from across the street sometimes, notebook in hand, as patients entered what once was hers. She didn't feel anger then, just a deep, measured sadness that truth could be stolen so easily and believed so quickly. But one night changed everything. Naomi called, her voice trembling. "Imani, you need to see this. Channel 7, right now." Imani turned on her old TV. Marcus was on screen, accepting another award. He spoke about humility and community roots, but then he said her name. "I want to thank a woman who inspired me years ago, Miss Imani Reed. Her dedication showed me the power of compassion. I just wish she had stayed to see what we built." Imani froze. Her name, twisted into his narrative, used like decoration. The crowd applauded. He smiled as if he had done her a kindness. Naomi whispered, "He's rewriting the story in front of the world." Imani's eyes hardened. "Then we'll rewrite it back, and one fact at a time." The next day, she met with Jamal again. "I'm done waiting quietly," she said. "It's time people hear the truth." He hesitated. "You want to go public?" "Yes, but not on his stage. On mine, they planned it carefully. A small press conference, not glamorous, just honest." Jamal called a few local reporters known for covering community stories. Imani prepared her binder, her photos, her evidence. The day of the conference, the sky was pale gray. Reporters gathered in a modest room at a local library. Cameras clicked softly. When Imani walked in, her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. She placed the binder on the table and began. 6 years ago, I opened a clinic on the south side called Reed Community Care. I didn't have much and only faith in neighbors. A man named Marcus Adams joined, saying he wanted to help. He did help at first. Then he took everything. The room fell silent. Cameras rolled. Imani opened her binder, showing receipts, emails, signatures. This, she said, tapping the papers, is proof. This is the truth he erased. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It was calm. The kind of calm that makes people listen. By the time she finished, the reporters looked stunned. One whispered, "This could be a big story." That night, the headlines shifted. Local founder claims nonprofit stolen by rising philanthropist. Marcus's PR team scrambled. His social media accounts turned defensive, calling it a misunderstanding. But seeds of doubt had been planted, and seeds, once planted, always find light. Imani sat by her window, city lights flickering like small promises in the distance. She didn't feel triumphant, just lighter, as if she had finally set something heavy down. Her journey wasn't over. Marcus still had lawyers, media, and influence. But now, for the first time, the world knew her name. The real one. And in that quiet Chicago night, with her binder of truth on the table beside her, Imani whispered to herself, "This isn't revenge. This is correction." The storm came faster than anyone expected. The morning after Imani's press conference, Chicago woke to her name splashed across local news feeds. Woman says philanthropist stole her clinic. Reed versus Adams, a battle for truth. Some called her brave. Others called her bitter. And Marcus? He called his publicist. By noon, his response was everywhere. He stood in front of a gleaming hospital, surrounded by microphones and sympathy. "I'm saddened," he said, his voice smooth as honey, "that someone I once worked with feels hurt. But these accusations are false. The clinic was gifted to my foundation. Miss Reed is confused. I wish her peace." Peace. That word struck Imani harder than any insult. He said it like he owned peace, like he could hand it to her when he was done taking everything else. Naomi burst into her apartment that afternoon, waving her phone. "Did you see what he said?" "He's calling you unstable." Imani exhaled slowly. Let him talk. Lies spread fast, but the truth lasts longer. Still, the words hurt. Online, people argued in comment sections. She's lying. No, he's lying. This is just jealousy. He's too successful to do something like that. The internet didn't know her story, her nights of cleaning wounds for free, her 6 years of unpaid work. To them, she was just another face in a scandal. Jamal advised her to stay silent. Let the evidence speak. Don't fight him on social media. But silence was hard when lies echoed louder than breathing. One evening, she walked down 63rd Street, her old neighborhood buzzing with its usual rhythm. Vendors shouting, buses sighing, music from car windows mixing with wind. 2 teenagers passed her, laughing, holding a flyer that showed Marcus's smiling face and a line that read, "A hero for the South Side." She felt invisible again. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Miss Reed?" She turned. It was Mrs. Holloway, an elderly woman who had come to her clinic years ago with her grandson. The woman's eyes shone with warmth. "I saw you on TV, baby. I told everyone, and you helped my boy when no one else would. Don't let them scare you." Imani felt tears press against her eyes. "Thank you. I just want the truth back." Mrs. Holloway touched her hand. "The truth don't need loud friends, child. It just needs time." That night, Imani wrote those words on a note and taped it to her mirror. The truth doesn't need loud friends, just time. The days ahead were brutal. Marcus's team filed counterclaims. They accused her of defamation and public harassment. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Journalists, lawyers, strangers. Some offered help, some offered insults. Then one call changed everything. A woman's voice said softly, "Miss Reed, I used to work for Marcus. I know what he did." Her name was Lydia Grant, a former assistant who had handled Marcus's charity paperwork. She agreed to meet Imani at a small diner off 79th Street. When Imani arrived, Lydia was already there, her eyes darting nervously. "I can't stay long," she whispered, sliding a flash drive across the table. "These are emails, proof that he changed documents, erased your name. I printed some too. Just be careful. He doesn't lose gracefully. Imani stared at the flash drive, a small object that suddenly felt like a weapon of truth. Why are you helping me? Lydia smiled faintly. Because you helped my sister at your clinic when no one else would. You never asked for payment. You deserve this. That night, Imani and Jamal reviewed the files. The emails were damning. Clear evidence that Marcus had forged signatures, transferred assets, and instructed staff to phase out Reed's name quietly. Jamal leaned back in his chair, stunned. This is gold. We can take him to court. Imani's lips trembled slightly. Then let's do it. Let's make him answer, not to me, but to the truth. They filed a formal lawsuit the next week. News outlets picked it up instantly. Court case filed against philanthropist Marcus Adams. The city buzzed. Some said she was crazy to challenge him. Others finally began to wonder who was really telling the truth. Marcus went on television again, calling it a misunderstanding gone too far. But his eyes, once confident, now flickered with something new, fear. The courtroom hearings began small. Wooden benches, echoing footsteps, papers shuffling. But for Imani, it felt like standing in the center of a storm she had built with her own courage. Marcus sat across from her, his lawyer whispering constantly. He didn't look at her, not once. The judge's voice was calm. We will begin with the plaintiff's evidence. Jamal stood, handed the binder to the clerk, and spoke firmly. Your Honor, this is Exhibit A, the original clinic lease under Ms. Reed's name. Page by page, Imani watched her truth unfold. Receipts, contracts, donation ledgers, all showing her handwriting, her signature, her unpaid hours. Then came the emails Lydia had provided. The courtroom grew silent as they were read aloud. Marcus's forged instructions filled the air like smoke that couldn't be ignored. When the judge finally looked up, his expression had changed. Mr. Adams, he said, these are serious discrepancies. Marcus cleared his throat. I'll have to check with my team. But everyone in that room already knew. Outside, reporters waited. Microphones crowded her face. Miss Reed, are you doing this for money? Are you trying to destroy his reputation? Imani stopped on the courthouse steps, the wind tugging at her coat. Her voice was calm, measured, but every word carried weight. I'm not destroying anything. I'm repairing what was broken. Fame fades. Justice doesn't. Her words spread online, quoted, shared, repeated. Fame fades. Justice doesn't. That single line began trending across social media. People started digging into her story. Local activists came forward, sharing similar experiences of stolen work. A quiet movement began, small but growing. Marcus's PR empire began to crack. Sponsors withdrew. Donors asked questions. His staff resigned quietly one by one. The man who once owned every headline now struggled to keep his name clean. At home, Imani didn't celebrate. She simply exhaled. Her small apartment, still above the laundromat, smelled of detergent and rain. On her table sat her binder, worn, heavy, but complete. She whispered softly, We're not done yet. But we're close. In that dim Chicago evening, thunder rolled in the distance. And somewhere inside that sound was the voice of a woman who had found her purpose again, not in revenge, but in redemption. The battle was no longer about two people. It was about a truth that refused to stay buried. Chicago had always been loud. Sirens, buses, laughter in the alleys, songs leaking from open windows. But lately, for Imani Reed, the city felt different. The noise wasn't comforting anymore. It was heavy, restless. Every sound felt like someone watching, waiting. Her case against Marcus had drawn attention she never wanted. News vans parked outside her clinic. Reporters lingered near her apartment. Strangers whispered when she walked by. Even grocery store clerks looked twice at her face. Some smiled in quiet support. Others looked away, and then came the phone calls. At first, they were just silence, long, empty breathing before the line disconnected. Then came the words. A man's voice, low, rough. You don't know who you're messing with. Another night. Drop it, Miss Reed, or you'll regret it. Imani didn't tell Jamal at first. She told herself it was nothing, just noise from people loyal to Marcus. But deep down, fear began to settle in her stomach like a stone. Marcus, meanwhile, was unraveling in public. His polished smile was cracking under pressure. He held emergency press conferences saying Imani was manipulated by opportunists. He called her lawsuit a witch hunt, He even tried to paint himself as the victim, a black entrepreneur attacked for his success. It was a clever tactic, one that confused the public and divided opinion. Online, people debated fiercely. Some saw through him. Others accused Imani of tearing down her own community hero. The weight of that irony crushed her. She had built the clinic to heal people like Marcus, young, ambitious, full of hope. And now that same dream was being used against her. One evening, Jamal came by her apartment, exhaustion in his face. "Imani," he said softly, "we got a letter from his lawyers. They're offering a settlement." She didn't move. "How much?" He slid the paper across the table. $750,000. "But you'll have to withdraw the case and sign a non-disclosure." She stared at the number. For someone who had lived paycheck to paycheck, it looked enormous. Enough to start fresh, to move away, to breathe again. But she also saw what it meant. Silence. Her story erased permanently. The truth buried for a price. Jamal leaned forward. "Look, I'm on your side. But I have to be honest, this fight is destroying you. The threats, the media, the pressure. I just need you to think about what you can live with." Imani smiled faintly, but her eyes were hollow. "I already lived with silence once. It almost killed me." She closed the folder. "Tell them no." The next week, things got uglier. Someone vandalized her clinic door, spray-painted the word liar across it in red. Patients stopped coming for a few days. A volunteer quit after receiving online harassment. Naomi found Imani scrubbing the paint early one morning. "You shouldn't have to do this," Naomi said, tears in her voice. Imani kept scrubbing. "Someone has to. Why not call the police?" "They can't arrest shame," she said quietly. The red paint came off slowly, leaving a faint stain that looked like a scar. A few nights later, she sat alone, reading through her binder again. Page after page, evidence, witness statements, bank transfers, proof of everything Marcus had done. But proof didn't feel powerful anymore. It felt lonely. She opened her phone and scrolled through messages from old patients, people she'd helped years ago. One from a young woman named Tasha read, "Miss Reed, you saved my daughter when I couldn't afford the hospital. I saw the news. Don't stop. People like me still believe in you." Tears rolled down Imani's cheeks as she read the words over and over. Don't stop. The next morning, she went to see Jamal. "I'm done hiding," she said. "If he wants a public war, I'll give him one, but I'll do it with truth, not anger." Jamal looked uncertain. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "The world needs to see that justice isn't just for the loud and powerful. It's for the quiet ones, too." They scheduled a second press event, this time larger. Journalists, activists, community leaders, even a few local politicians attended. When Imani walked onto the small stage, the room fell silent. She wore no makeup, no designer clothes, just a plain navy dress and the same calm she'd carried since the beginning. She spoke slowly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had already lost everything except her truth. "I was told to take the money, to stay silent, to forget, but justice is not for sale. This is not about revenge. It's about restoring honesty in a place that forgot what it means to be honest." Then she held up the photo, the one of her and Marcus, years ago, smiling at the clinic's opening. "He stood beside me once as a friend. Now I stand alone, and not to destroy him, but to remind everyone that the truth doesn't need permission." The room erupted in applause. Some cried. Some just stared, silent and moved. That night, a video of her speech went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Justice for Imani began trending on social media. Celebrities shared her words. Activists called her the voice for the voiceless. And while Marcus tried to control the narrative, it was too late. The tide had turned, but behind that viral success, Imani felt something heavier. The cost of truth was loneliness. Friends grew distant, afraid to be involved. The clinic's funds ran low. She barely slept, standing by her window one night. Watching the city lights shimmer, she whispered to herself, "Maybe justice always asks for too much." But then she remembered Mrs. Holloway's words. The truth doesn't need loud friends. Just time. So she waited. She waited for the day when the court would call her name, the day when lies would collapse under their own weight, the day when truth finally would stand without trembling. And as she turned off her lamp that night, the city outside her window pulsed like a heartbeat, reminding her that even in the dark, light was gathering strength. The day the trial began, Chicago was gray and restless. Rain hung low, making the streets shimmer like wet glass. Inside the courthouse, the air felt charged, like a storm was waiting for permission to break. Imani Reed sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, her binder resting beside her like an anchor. She had worn her simplest black dress, the same one she used to wear to clinic fundraisers. To her, this wasn't about appearance. It was about endurance. Across the aisle sat Marcus Adams, the man who once called her partner, friend, sister in mission. Now he wouldn't even look at her. His tailored navy suit looked expensive, his expression calm, but his eyes carried that flicker, the faint tremor of a man who'd begun to understand that truth. Once unleashed, can't be controlled. The courtroom buzzed with quiet voices, reporters whispering, camera shutters clicking softly, lawyers murmuring. Then the judge entered. All rise. Imani stood, heart pounding but steady. The sound of her own breathing seemed louder than the rain outside. When the judge sat, time slowed. Case number 22481, Reed versus Adams Foundation, the clerk read. Jamal rose first. His voice was firm, his words simple. Your Honor, this is not just a case about stolen property. This is about stolen legacy, about a woman whose name and work were taken and replaced by a man's lies. Marcus's lawyer, a sleek man with silver hair, smiled faintly. We intend to prove this so-called legacy was freely given, that Miss Reed's claims are nothing but jealousy and confusion. Imani felt her fingers tighten around the edge of the table. She didn't speak, not yet. Her moment would come. The first few witnesses were formalities, property clerks, donors, volunteers. Each one confirmed small pieces of the puzzle, but the courtroom remained cautious. Marcus's side argued every detail, twisting words into fog. Then Naomi took the stand. Her hands trembled slightly as she swore the oath. Imani gave her a small nod, the same calm nod she'd given her countless times in the clinic when things got tough. Naomi began quietly. I worked with Miss Reed from the beginning. She ran the clinic, trained us, handled everything. Mr. Adams joined later. He said he wanted to help. But it was always Miss Reed who did the work. Marcus's lawyer leaned forward. Did she ever say she owned the clinic? Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't have to. Everyone knew it was hers. A ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom. Marcus's lawyer frowned. So you're basing ownership on assumption? Naomi met his gaze, steady. On memory, on truth. Next came Raymond, the janitor who had worked at the clinic since its first week. He brought with him a crumpled photo, Imani painting the first clinic sign, sweat on her forehead, smile wide. The words Reed Community Care clearly visible behind her. When the photo was projected on the courtroom screen, something in the air shifted. Marcus looked down. His lawyer objected, but the judge waved it aside. Overruled. For a moment, silence reigned, the kind that sits heavy with truth. Then it was Marcus's turn to speak. He stood with practiced charm, straightening his jacket before addressing the court. I never meant harm. Miss Reed and I worked together. She was passionate, yes, but she lacked structure. I helped her grow. When the clinic faced debt, I stepped in. Everything was done legally. His voice softened, feigning regret. I'm sorry she feels hurt. But we built something bigger than either of us. I just managed it better. A few people in the gallery nodded, unsure what to believe. Jamal rose. Mr. Adams, did you or did you not instruct your staff to remove Miss Reed's name from clinic documents? Marcus hesitated. I don't recall that specifically. Jamal clicked the remote. The courtroom screen lit up with a printed email. Marcus's own words filled the display. Phase out Reed's name. Too confusing for donors. Make the transition smooth. A gasp ran through the room. The judge's eyebrows lifted. Marcus's face lost its color. Jamal's voice was cool. Do you recall it now? Marcus stammered. That was taken out of context. Context, Jamal said. Doesn't erase handwriting. Imani watched it unfold like a movie she had already seen in dreams, the lies peeling away layer by layer. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her eyes only glistened with quiet relief. Then came the hardest moment. Jamal turned to her. Ms. Reed, please take the stand. The courtroom hushed. Every camera pointed toward her. Imani stood, her knees steady but her heart trembling like fragile glass. She walked slowly, each step echoing the years it took to get there. When she took her seat, Jamal gave her a reassuring nod. Ms. Reed, he began gently. In your own words, what happened? Imani took a deep breath. I started Reed Community Care 6 years ago. I wanted to help people who had no money, no insurance. Marcus came later. He said he wanted to support my mission. I believed him. Her voice wavered slightly, but she continued. He helped for a while, and then he changed. Papers disappeared. My name was removed from files. He told donors the clinic was his idea. When I tried to speak, no one listened. He took the clinic, the credit, everything. Jamal nodded. Why did you file this case? Imani looked straight at the judge. Because truth doesn't disappear just because someone paints over it. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who really built the foundation. There was no sound, only the rhythmic ticking of the courtroom clock. Even Marcus's lawyer had nothing to say. When the session ended, Imani walked out of the courtroom surrounded by flashing lights and microphones. A reporter shouted, "Miss Reed, do you hate him?" She stopped, turned, and answered softly, "No, I don't hate him. I just stopped protecting his lie." The clip went viral before nightfall. Across the city, people who once doubted her began to believe. Former donors withdrew their support from Marcus. Organizations froze his accounts pending investigation. The man who had lived off applause was now haunted by silence. That evening, back in her apartment, Imani sat by the window, staring at the rain that streaked the glass. Naomi called to say, "You were incredible." Imani smiled faintly. "I was terrified." Naomi replied, "That's what courage looks like, honey. Fear, standing anyway." Imani looked down at her binder, its edges worn, its pages marked with fingerprints and hope. She whispered to herself, "We're not done yet. But we're close." Outside, thunder rolled again over Chicago. The storm had begun long ago, but now, finally, it was breaking. The next morning, the city woke up to chaos. The storm that had been gathering quietly around Marcus Adams finally broke. Headlines screamed across social media and television screens. Philanthropist accused of fraud and misrepresentation. Adams Foundation under investigation for forgery. Every station replayed the courtroom footage, his stammer, the email, Imani's calm truth, and suddenly the man once painted as a savior became the villain of his own story. For years, Marcus had been the symbol of hope in South Chicago, a self-made man who gave back. But now, his name carried a new weight: deceit, betrayal, arrogance. And the more the truth spread, the more people remembered what they had forgotten, that the clinic had once been called Reed Community Care. Inside her apartment, Imani sat by the small television she rarely used. The broadcast flickered with footage of Marcus being rushed past reporters, his expression grim. His lawyer shoved microphones away, shouting, "No comment," Naomi called, breathless with disbelief. "Girl, did you see the news? They raided his office." Imani blinked, stunned. "Raided?" "Yes." The auditors found duplicate ledgers. 2 sets of books, Imani. One real, one fake. They say he used charity money to fund his campaigns. Imani's heart pounded. She hadn't wanted to destroy him, she just wanted truth. But truth had a habit of uncovering more than you asked for. She turned off the TV. The apartment felt too quiet. The sound of rain against the window returned, soft and persistent. For a moment she closed her eyes and whispered, "God, please don't let me become what I'm fighting." But the city didn't slow down. Reporters called nonstop. Journalists camped outside her building. When she walked to the store, strangers approached her, some offering hugs, others wanting photos. "Miss Reed, you're an inspiration. Justice looks good on you. Can I post this on TikTok?" The attention was dizzying. She had wanted recognition for the clinic, not fame for the fight. Now she was both a symbol and a spectacle. Jamal called her that night. "You did it, Imani. The public's with you now." She sighed softly. "Then why does it still hurt?" He paused. "Because winning doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes justice costs peace." Marcus disappeared from public view for a while, but his lawyers kept fighting. They filed motions, dragged hearings, delayed outcomes, classic tactics to exhaust her. Imani kept showing up anyway. Every court date, every deposition, every piece of paperwork. During one session, Marcus finally looked at her for the first time in months. His face was thinner now, the confidence gone. When their eyes met, she saw something unexpected and shame. Maybe fear, maybe both. During a recess, as everyone filed out, he stopped near her table. "Imani," he said quietly, his voice breaking for the first time. You really won't stop, will you? She looked up, her voice steady but gentle. I stopped once. That's how you got away with it. He tried to smile, but it trembled. You could have had everything, the settlement, the fame. Now you'll just have enemies. Imani met his eyes. Then I'll stand with the truth. It's the only friend that never leaves. He said nothing more. When he walked away, she saw the man he truly was. Not a monster, not a hero. Just a man built out of lies that finally collapsed under their own weight. The investigation deepened. Emails surfaced. Donations misused. Evidence stacked higher each day. The Adams Foundation was suspended pending review. And his sponsors withdrew one after another. Soon, his name was no longer followed by applause, only silence. But the silence that saved Imani also started to suffocate her. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Invitations poured in. Talk shows, podcasts, award ceremonies. Everyone wanted a piece of her story. Everyone wanted her pain dressed up as content. Naomi warned her. Be careful, honey. They'll try to turn you into a headline same way they did with him. Imani nodded. I know. That's not the kind of justice I want. So she began turning down interviews, focusing instead on rebuilding the clinic. But rebuilding wasn't easy. The building lease was tangled in legal freezes. Her savings were nearly gone. The world called her brave, but bravery didn't pay rent. One evening, she sat by the window, the binder on her lap. She whispered, I got the truth, Mama, but I lost everything else. The tears came quietly. She didn't fight them. Outside, the city lights blurred through her tears like stars melting in the rain. Days turned into weeks. Then one morning, an envelope arrived in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a short letter. Handwritten, unfamiliar. You don't know me, Miss Reed. My son works at your clinic again. He said you reopened it last week, even with no money. I just wanted to say, you remind us that good people still exist. Please don't stop. The neighborhood needs you. Imani read it 3 times. Then she smiled into you, a real quiet smile, the kind she hadn't felt in months. She looked around her apartment and small, messy, but warm. On the wall above her desk, she taped the letter next to Mrs. Holloway's words. The truth doesn't need loud friends, just time. The world outside could stay noisy. She didn't need its applause. Because slowly, quietly, the truth had done what it always does. It outlived the lie. Later that week, Naomi handed her a local paper. On the last page, in small type, an official notice read, The city recognizes Reed Community Care as an independent, verified organization. Founder, Ms. Imani Reed. Imani stared at it, tears gathering again, not of pain this time, but relief. She folded the paper gently and said, It's back. Our name is back. Naomi hugged her tightly. You did it, Imani, you really did it. She smiled faintly. No, we did. That night, Chicago breathed softly outside her window. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like new beginnings. Imani sat by her binder one last time. She touched its worn cover, whispered, You can rest now, and closed it. Justice had taken everything from her. Comfort, safety, peace. But it had given her something stronger. A clear name. A clean conscience. And a community that remembered who she truly was. Justice, Imani Reed learned, was not the end of a story. It was the start of a quieter war. The noise of headlines and hearings faded. Reporters stopped calling. The city moved on to new scandals. But for Imani, silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. Her name was cleared, her clinic restored. On paper, she had won. But when she walked into Reed Community Care for the first time after the verdict, the air felt different. The laughter that once filled the small hallways had vanished, replaced by the hum of new machines and a strange kind of reverence, the way people look at someone they admire but no longer really know. Naomi tried to make it normal again. You should be proud, she said, rearranging bandages on a shelf. Imani smiled faintly. I am, I just don't know who I am now that the fight is over. Naomi chuckled softly. You're the same woman who started this place. You just got more stories to tell, but that wasn't true. The woman who started the clinic believed in goodness without question. The woman standing here now had learned that good people could be forgotten, and lies could wear suits. For weeks, she tried to fall back into rhythm. She worked 12-hour shifts again, Cleaned tables, held babies, checked blood pressure. But the quiet moments hit the hardest. When the clinic emptied at night, when the echo of footsteps faded, when the city's neon lights blinked through the window and reminded her of the nights she used to dream instead of fight. One evening, she locked up and stood outside the clinic door. The sign glowed gently under the streetlight. Reed Community Care, restoring hope. For a long time, she just stared at it. Then she whispered, "It cost me everything to put my name back here." At home, she opened her binder, not out of habit, but because she couldn't quite let it go. The pages were worn, corners bent, fingerprints smudged into the margins. Each sheet carried a story, a battle, a wound. She ran her fingers over the word Reed typed on the first lease agreement. She remembered how excited she had been the day she signed it. Back then, she thought the hardest thing in life was finding money to keep the lights on. She hadn't known that the real fight would be for the right to exist and to be remembered. Sometimes she asked herself, was it worth it? The money she'd lost, the friends who'd grown distant, the peace she'd traded for truth. The answer never came easily. It changed with her mood. Some nights, yes. Other nights, she wasn't sure. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived in the mail. Community Award Ceremony, honoring Imani Reed for service and integrity. She almost didn't go. Fame still felt poisoned to her. But Naomi insisted. You owe it to yourself to stand on that stage, no, not as a fighter, but as the founder. The night of the event, the hall was filled with familiar faces, old patients, volunteers, neighbors. As she stepped up to the microphone, applause rippled gently through the crowd. For the first time, applause didn't sound like a weapon. It sounded like gratitude. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that comes from exhaustion mixed with grace. I used to think justice was about punishment, she said. Now I know it's about restoration, bringing back what was lost. Not just to me, but to everyone who believed in what's right. Her voice broke a little. The price of justice isn't money or fame. It's loneliness. It's the long nights where you wonder if telling the truth was worth the cost. But I can tell you this, if you lose everything for the truth, you haven't lost it all. The room was silent, heavy, moved. Then the applause came. Quiet at first, then thunderous. She looked out at the faces. People she had healed, people she had fed, people she had inspired. And for the first time since the trial began, she didn't feel like a victim of Marcus Adams. She felt like Imani Reed again. The woman who built something from nothing and refused to let anyone erase it. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the cold Chicago night. The city glittered like broken glass under streetlights. A light snow had begun to fall, soft, clean, forgiving. Jamal found her standing by the curb, her award tucked under her arm. You did it, he said. She smiled. We did it. He looked at her carefully. What's next for you? Imani thought for a moment. I think I'll teach. Help others protect their dreams before someone steals them. Jamal nodded. That sounds like justice with purpose. They laughed softly. Later that night, Imani sat by her window again, sipping tea, watching the snow pile gently on the street below. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Miss Reed, I was one of Marcus's interns. I watched what he did, but I was too scared to speak. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. Because of you, I'll never stay silent again. Imani put her phone down and smiled faintly. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. Not the peace of quiet, but the peace of purpose. The next morning, she walked to the clinic early, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. The sunrise broke through the skyline, spilling golden light over the city. For a moment, everything was still. She whispered to herself, this is what justice looks like, not loud, not perfect, but alive. And as she opened the clinic door, the smell of antiseptic and coffee greeted her. Familiar, grounding, real. She had paid the price for justice, and though she carried scars no one could see, they no longer hurt. They simply reminded her that truth once freed never dies. It just keeps working quietly, like healing itself. The snow melted slowly that spring, and with it came something Imani Reed had not expected. Change. Not the loud kind that filled headlines, but the quiet, persistent kind that grows in the cracks of ordinary lives. Her story had already traveled far beyond South Chicago. Articles about her case were being used in university lectures about ethics and integrity. Journalists cited her as the woman who fought for truth without turning bitter. Yet in her mind, it was still simple. She had just refused to be erased. At Reed Community Care, the days began to look like they used to. The familiar rhythm of voices, the smell of disinfectant, the laughter of children in the waiting room. But there was something new, something invisible in the air. Hope. Not the naive kind, but the earned kind. The kind that says if she could stand, so can we. One morning, a young man waited by the clinic door before opening hours. He was nervous, clutching a worn notebook. "Miss Reed?" he asked shyly when she arrived. She smiled gently. "Yes, that's me. My name's Andre. I run a youth center down on 71st. We've been struggling with funding. After I saw your story, I thought, maybe I could learn how to protect what I'm building." Imani's heart softened. "You came to the right place." Inside, she poured him coffee and began showing him the basics: how to register ownership, file non-profit paperwork, and keep records in his own name. As she spoke, Andre scribbled furiously, nodding like every word was gold. He looked up once and said, "You don't even know me, but you're helping me." Imani smiled. Someone once helped me too by believing I deserved better. When he left, she stood at the window and watched him walk away, shoulders straighter, steps lighter. It struck her then, justice didn't stop at the courtroom door. It multiplied from one voice to another, from one brave act to a dozen quiet ones. Weeks later, she received an email from Lydia Grant, the former assistant who had once handed her the flash drive that changed everything. "Miss Reed, I've started working with an organization that protects small business owners from exploitation. Your story inspired the program's name, the Reed Project. We're teaching people how to secure their legal rights before signing with investors. I thought you'd want to know you've started something bigger than you think." Imani sat in silence for a long time after reading it. Then she whispered, "Bigger than I think." She opened her old binder, the same one that once felt like a weapon, and smiled. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a blueprint for survival. In the months that followed, she started visiting schools and community centers, teaching free weekend workshops called Protect Your Dream. She stood in classrooms filled with young entrepreneurs, artists and nurses, all people with ambition but no protection. She told them her story not to gain pity but to give them armor. "You don't have to be loud to be strong," she'd say. "You just have to keep your receipts." Every time she said it, laughter followed. But it was the kind of laughter that came with understanding. Then one afternoon, as the workshop ended, a young woman lingered behind. "Miss Reed," she said quietly, "I used to work for Marcus. I thought he was helping people. When your case came out, I was angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. I left that job. Now I'm in nursing school, and because of you." Imani smiled through the sting of tears. "Then I'd say we both found our purpose." Meanwhile, Marcus Adams's story had taken a different turn. His foundation was dissolved. He lost his awards, his sponsors, his reputation. He moved away from Chicago, quietly and without ceremony. Some called it justice, others called it tragedy, but Imani didn't celebrate. When Naomi once asked her how she felt about his downfall, she replied simply, "It's not my victory to own." The truth took care of itself, and she meant it. For every piece of power he had stolen, she had gained something far greater: credibility, respect, peace. Months passed. The city began to speak her name with pride again. Local papers stopped calling her the woman wronged and started calling her the woman who restored trust. One evening, she was invited to a town hall meeting. The mayor herself handed her a certificate of recognition. "Miss Reed," she said in front of hundreds, "you didn't just win a case, you reminded this city that truth still matters. You made us remember that integrity isn't weakness, it's strength." Imani's acceptance speech was short and quiet. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration and of truth, of dignity, of belief. We all deserve to live without fear that our stories will be stolen. Her words were printed in the next morning's paper, under the headline, "The Healer Who Healed a City." At the clinic, donations began to pour in. People who once doubted her now sent supplies, volunteers, and letters. One day, she found an anonymous note slipped under the clinic door. "For my mother, who worked all her life and never got credit, Thank you for fighting for people like her. She pressed it to her chest, her eyes glistening. In that moment, she realized something she had missed for months. Justice had never been just about her. It had always been about everyone who had ever been overlooked, silenced, or replaced. That night, sitting in her apartment with a cup of tea, she finally opened her window to the city's sound, the distant sirens, the laughter, the music. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive again. She whispered to herself, "We didn't just win a case. We started a movement." And in that moment, Chicago seemed to breathe with her. One heartbeat, one truth, one ripple at a time. Summer came soft and warm that year. The streets of South Chicago buzzed with the hum of small victories. Kids chasing ice cream trucks, vendors calling out their prices, buses sighing down the same old routes. Life was returning to rhythm, and so was Imani Reed. Her clinic was thriving again. The volunteers had grown into a small, tight-knit family. Patients smiled when they saw her. Every corner of Reed Community Care seemed to carry her heartbeat, steady, humble, alive. But one late afternoon, while she was reviewing patient forms in her office, Naomi entered quietly, holding a white envelope. "Imani, this just came in for you," she said softly. The return address froze Imani's breath before she even opened it. Marcus Adams. For a long time, she didn't move. The envelope felt heavy, as if it carried years of silence inside. Finally, she tore it open. The handwriting was uneven, desperate, a far cry from the confident signature that once signed away her name. "Imani, you don't owe me anything, but I owe you the truth. The truth I buried, the one you refused to let die. I've lost everything. My foundation, my money, my name. I used to think power meant being seen. Now I know it's about being remembered for the right reasons. You were right. You were always right. I told myself you'd forgive me if I called it ambition, not theft. But I see now that I stole more than a clinic. I stole your peace. I'm leaving the city. I don't want to run anymore, but I also don't belong here. Before I go, I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not to fix what I broke, but to finally speak the truth out loud. You built something that mattered. I only borrowed its shine. The light was never mine." Marcus Imani read the letter twice. Then a third time, her chest tightened with emotions she couldn't name. Anger, sadness, pity, relief, all tangled together like threads that no longer fit any pattern. Naomi watched her quietly. "You okay?" Imani nodded slowly, eyes still on the letter. "He's broken," Naomi sighed. "Sometimes the fall is the only teacher some folks understand." "Maybe," Imani whispered, folding the paper gently. "But he's still human. I can't hate him." Not anymore. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing his words. The light was never mine. She thought back to the day they first met, how hopeful she had been, how proud to share her dream with someone who seemed to care. Marcus wasn't evil then. He was lost, hungry for validation, desperate to be seen. Somewhere along the line, ambition had turned him hollow. It was strange, she thought. She had fought for justice, but now that she had it, what lingered most wasn't triumph. It was compassion. A week later, she received another letter, this time from the county's public defender's office. Marcus had been formally charged with financial fraud and ordered to repay stolen funds to community organizations. He had pleaded guilty. The notice included a request. Mr. Adams wishes to deliver a public apology during the sentencing hearing. He specifically asked if Ms. Reed would attend. Naomi frowned when she read it. "You don't have to go. You've already done your part." Imani looked out the window. The sunset was painting the city in gold and crimson. "Maybe I do. Not for him and for me." The courthouse felt different this time, smaller, quieter. There were no cameras, no crowds, no headlines. Just a few reporters, a judge, and the hum of air conditioning. Marcus entered in a gray suit that didn't fit quite right anymore. His posture was slumped, his eyes dim. When he saw Imani sitting in the front row, he froze, then gave a small, uncertain nod. She returned it, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. When it was his turn to speak, his voice cracked on the first sentence. "I spent years building a story about myself," he said, "but it wasn't true. The truth was standing beside me the whole time, and I erased her." He looked at Imani then, tears wetting the corners of his eyes. "I took her name, her dream, and called them mine. I thought I could control the narrative. But you can't build forever on a lie. I'm sorry, Miss Reed, for everything. The courtroom was silent except for the echo of his words. Imani felt something inside her release, like the last knot finally untied. Not forgiveness exactly, but closure, the kind that leaves space for peace to return. When the judge asked if she wished to speak, Imani stood. Her voice was calm, clear, and without bitterness. What he took from me, I built again, stronger, because truth can be rebuilt even after it's stolen. I don't need revenge. The fact that we're standing here in truth is enough. The judge nodded. Marcus lowered his head. After the hearing, as she stepped into the sunlight, Jamal joined her on the steps. You're the only client I've ever seen thank the man who wronged her, he said softly. Imani smiled faintly. I didn't thank him. I thanked truth for surviving us both. They stood for a while, watching the city move, kids laughing, buses honking. The same world that had held both her pain and her redemption. That evening, back at the clinic, Imani placed Marcus's letter in the back of her binder. Not as a wound, but as a lesson. She wrote on the cover, "The price of truth is high, but the peace after it is priceless." Naomi found her there and asked, "Do you ever wish things went differently?" Imani thought for a moment, then smiled softly. "If they did, I wouldn't have found myself again, so no. I just wish it hadn't hurt so much to learn." They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that comes after survival. Tired, tender, and true. That night, as she walked home, the air smelled like rain and warm pavement. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang faintly. Imani stopped for a moment, lifted her face to the sky, and closed her eyes. The fight was over. The noise was gone. Only peace remained, and fragile, but hers. And in that stillness, she whispered the same words she had spoken to herself years ago when it all began. This was never about fame. It was always about justice. Autumn arrived in Chicago with soft winds and orange leaves, carrying with it the quiet peace of closure. For the first time in years, Imani Reed didn't wake up with the weight of battle pressing against her chest. The air felt lighter. Even the sound of the city, trains clattering, horns echoing, felt like life instead of noise. The court had closed the case, Marcus had vanished into quiet accountability, and the clinic was thriving again. But Imani couldn't shake one lingering truth. Victory meant nothing if it ended only with her. Justice, she believed, should ripple forward, not just rest in a single name. So one cold October morning, she made a decision. She called Jamal and Naomi into her small office. "I'm starting something new," she said, her voice calm but sure. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Please don't tell me you're opening another clinic." "You barely sleep as it is," Imani chuckled. "No, something different. Something that helps others before they end up where I did." Jamal leaned forward. "What do you have in mind?" She smiled faintly. "A foundation. To teach women how to protect their work, their names, their dreams. A scholarship for those who've been silenced or overlooked. I want to name it the Grace Initiative." Naomi tilted her head. "Grace?" "Yes," Imani said softly. "Because justice fixes what's broken. But grace, it teaches us how to keep walking after the fixing is done." The Grace Initiative started small, just a desk in the corner of her clinic, a folder full of ideas, and a heart still healing. But word spread quickly. Within weeks, donations came in from community leaders, activists, and even strangers who had followed her story. Her first scholarship went to a young single mother studying nursing. Her second, to a local teacher who wanted to open a literacy program. Her third, to a teenager who dreamed of becoming a lawyer to protect people like Miss Reed. Imani attended every award ceremony herself, shaking hands, smiling through tears. Each recipient carried a little of her story forward, proof that justice, when shared, becomes legacy. One day, a letter arrived in the mail. The sender's name froze her for a moment, Marcus Adams. She hesitated, then opened it. The writing was neater this time, careful, deliberate. "Miss Reed, I saw a story about your new foundation. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I have a request. Not for me, for the people I failed. If you ever consider it, please name one of your scholarships after someone else. Not me. I don't deserve it. But after the people whose trust I broke. Let them be remembered as part of something better. And if you can, forgive me. I'm not asking to forget. I just hope you find peace knowing that your light didn't just expose me. It changed me. With respect, Marcus Imani sat still for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive, but she also knew she didn't want to live carrying bitterness. So she wrote back one simple line, "I forgive you. Marcus, not to free you, but to free myself," and she meant it. Months later, the Grace Initiative held its first official gala. Small, warm, decorated with simple lights and framed photos of every woman who had received a scholarship. The air buzzed with laughter, stories, and soft jazz from a neighborhood band. Imani stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. She saw faces from every corner of her journey: Naomi, Jamal, Lydia, Andre, even some of her former patients. The room shimmered with hope, not glamour. When it was time for her speech, she held the microphone and smiled. "This," she began softly, "is what justice should look like. Not revenge, not spotlight, but rebuilding. Every woman here tonight is proof that broken things can bloom again." She paused, eyes glistening. "I named this the Grace Initiative because grace is what comes after justice. It's what lets us forgive, rebuild, and rise again, even when we thought we couldn't." The crowd stood and applauded, the kind of applause that wasn't for fame, but for truth lived out loud. After the event, she stepped outside into the cool night. The city lights glowed gold against the dark. Naomi joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You know," Naomi said, "I think you've done it. You turned pain into purpose." Imani smiled softly. "Pain's just a teacher. Purpose is the lesson." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the cars pass, the laughter echo from down the street. Then Naomi asked quietly, "Do you ever think about him?" "Marcus?" "Yeah," Imani nodded slowly. "Sometimes. Not with hate, just gratitude. If he hadn't taken everything from me, I might have never learned what I was really made of." Naomi chuckled. "Only you would thank the man who stole from you." Imani smiled. "Maybe that's what grace really is. Thanking the storm for the strength it gave you." Later that night, she returned home, the city quiet under a soft drizzle. She sat at her small desk, the same one where she had once cried over betrayal, and opened her binder one last time. Inside, she added a new page, a printed certificate that read, "The Grace Initiative Scholarship, in honor of second chances." At the bottom, in her neat handwriting, she wrote, "This one is for those who fell and chose to rise anyway." She smiled, closed the binder, and placed it on a shelf beside a photo of her clinic's reopening day. The light through her window flickered gently across her face. She was no longer just a woman who fought for justice. She was a woman who rebuilt grace. Years slipped by quietly, and Chicago's skyline grew taller, brighter, busier. But inside its heartbeat, one small building on 63rd Street remained steady: Reed Community Care. The clinic had long outgrown its humble beginnings. What started as 2 rooms and a borrowed cot had become a full-fledged community health center. Its walls were lined with photos of smiling patients, volunteers, and scholarship winners from the Grace Initiative. To the world, Imani Reed was no longer just a name. She was a movement. But to the people who knew her, she was still Miss Reed, the woman who made you feel seen when no one else did. One early morning, she walked through the clinic's halls before anyone else arrived. Her steps were slower now, her hair streaked with silver, but her spirit hadn't dimmed. She paused to look at a mural painted by local students. Her face, surrounded by hands of all colors reaching toward the words truth, grace, healing. She smiled, her eyes wet with quiet gratitude. A young nurse named Tamika caught her standing there. "You okay, Miss Reed?" Imani nodded softly. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Tamika grinned. "My mama used to tell me about you when I was little. Said you taught this city what courage looks like." Imani chuckled. "Your mama was kind. Courage is just fear that's learned how to breathe." The Grace Initiative had become a nationwide program by then. Chapters had opened in Detroit, Atlanta, New Orleans, and even Los Angeles. Women from all walks of life, nurses, teachers, activists, artists, had received scholarships in Imani's name. Each year, the foundation held a national conference called Restoring Grace, where Imani was the guest of honor. She didn't enjoy the spotlight, But she attended every year because she wanted to see the faces of those carrying her torch. At one such conference, a young woman named Amara Lewis stood on stage telling her story. "When I was 16, Amara said, her voice trembling, I almost gave up on school. I thought people like me didn't matter. Then I watched a documentary about a woman named Imani Reed, how she fought for her truth and forgave the man who wronged her. I decided I wanted to be that kind of woman. Today I'm a lawyer, protecting small business owners, and I'm proud to say I'm a Grace Scholar." The crowd rose in applause. Imani sat in the front row, her hands clasped, her heart full. Tears blurred her vision, but her smile was steady. After the event, Amara approached her shyly. "Miss Reed, you changed my life." Imani held her hands warmly. "No, sweetheart. You changed your own. I just left the light on." As years passed, Marcus Adams' name quietly disappeared from the city's memory. But sometimes letters arrived, from men and women who said they had worked under him, or had once admired him, and that Imani's grace had changed how they lived. One letter read, "I used to believe success was about being seen. Now I know it's about being remembered for what you give. You taught me that." Another said, "My daughter learned about you in her school's ethics class. She wants to start a clinic one day. Thank you for showing her what justice looks like in real life." Every letter felt like a small echo of hope, proof that her story had become something greater than pain. It had become a mirror for others to see their own courage. One evening, Naomi stopped by her apartment with dinner, just like old times. The two women sat by the window, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. Naomi grinned. "Remember when we were scrubbing red paint off the clinic door?" Imani laughed softly. "How could I forget? I can still smell that awful cleaner." Naomi nodded. "And now look at you. National conferences, awards, scholarships in your name. You built something unbreakable." Imani sipped her tea and smiled. "We built it. All of us. Every hand that refused to give up." She looked outside, the last rays of sunlight painting the city in gold. "You know, Naomi, I used to think my story was about revenge. Then I thought it was about justice. But now, I think it's about continuance." Naomi tilted her head. "Continuance?" "Yes," Imani said softly. "When one person refuses to let truth die, the world keeps spinning in the right direction. That's what I've learned. Justice doesn't end with you. It keeps moving through others." Naomi nodded slowly. "And you've given it a heartbeat." A few months later, Imani visited one of the new Grace Initiative chapters in Detroit. As she entered the hall, she saw rows of young women, many wearing white coats, others carrying law books and notebooks. The sight filled her with a pride so deep it ached. When she was invited to speak, she began the way she always did. "I once thought I lost everything. My name, my work, my faith. But I learned something simple. If you hold on to the truth long enough, it learns to walk beside you again. Sometimes it just takes the long way home." Her words drew tears from the audience. Some wrote them down, others whispered them to one another. Imani smiled, her eyes sweeping across the faces before her. So young, so determined, so alive. "This," she said softly, "is what legacy looks like. Not fame, not revenge, but a room full of people who refuse to let goodness die." That night, back in her hotel room, she stood by the window overlooking the Detroit skyline. The city lights glittered, reflections dancing across the glass. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of gratitude. The past no longer haunted her. It had become her teacher. Marcus's betrayal had built her resolve. Her pain had become a pathway, and her justice had become her legacy. For the first time, she realized her story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced and still found their voice. As the clock ticked softly in the quiet room, Imani smiled to herself and whispered, "Maybe justice isn't a destination at all. Maybe it's a legacy we leave behind, one truth at a time." The lights outside blinked like small affirmations, and the woman who once fought alone finally understood. She had not just restored her name, she had changed the world around it. Part 13. The final chapter, 900 to 1,000 words, emotional. Narrator, Chicago setting, tone, legacy, wisdom, emotional closure. The air in Chicago carried a quiet peace that autumn, the kind that only comes when both the city and the soul have learned to rest. Imani Reed was now 63. Her hair had gone silver, her walk a little slower, her laugh softer but richer. Yet her eyes, those calm, deep, unbreakable eyes, still carried the same fire that once faced down a city of lies and won. Reed Community Care had expanded into 3 clinics across Chicago's South Side. The Grace Initiative was now international, with chapters in 12 countries. Her name appeared in textbooks, on community center walls, and in classrooms where students studied ethics, perseverance, and the long road to justice. But Imani no longer chased recognition. She spent most mornings in her office with tea and her old binder, now frayed at the edges, its pages yellow with time. It sat open beside a newer one labeled Legacy Letters. Inside it were handwritten notes, letters she had written to young women across the years. Each one carried a piece of her truth. She had written to nurses, to teachers, to entrepreneurs, to mothers who refused to give up. Now, it was time to write her last one, to the next generation she would never meet. She picked up her pen slowly, feeling the weight of the years in her fingers. The afternoon sun cast long golden lines across her desk as she began to write, "To the ones who will carry the light. When I was young, I believed success meant applause. Later, I believed it meant justice. Now, after a lifetime of building, breaking, and rebuilding, I know success is something quieter, peace. You will face a world that sometimes forgets your name, a world that might steal your work, your credit, your kindness. And when it does, you will have 2 choices. You can fight to destroy what hurt you, or you can fight to restore what's right. Choose restoration. Destruction ends stories. Restoration begins them again. When they tell you that the truth doesn't matter, remember this. Truth is patient. It doesn't shout. It waits. And when you're tired, when the world feels too loud, remember that the truth doesn't need loud friends. It only needs time. You may lose comfort. You may lose company. But if you hold on long enough, you will never lose yourself. And if one day you stand in a room where people speak your name with respect, don't let it stop there. Use that moment to lift someone else's name beside yours. That's how we keep justice alive, not by owning it, but by sharing it. If my story has taught you anything, let it be this. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Justice without compassion becomes pride, and grace is the strongest weapon you'll ever wield. I fought for my truth because I refused to vanish. Now you fight for yours, not with anger, but with light. Carry it carefully. Carry it proudly. Carry it forward. Imani Reed. She placed the letter inside a white envelope and sealed it. On the front, she wrote in neat fading cursive, "For the next dreamer who refuses to disappear." Then she tucked it inside her old binder, the one that started it all. The same one that once held proof, anger, and pain, now filled with hope, lessons, and love. That evening, Naomi came by with soup and laughter just like always. They sat by the window, the city glowing gold outside. Naomi smiled. "Still writing letters, huh?" Imani chuckled softly. "Yeah, I figure the truth deserves company." Naomi leaned back. "You ever think about retiring?" Imani looked out at the skyline, at the lights flickering across the neighborhood she once fought to protect. "Maybe one day," she said, "but not yet. As long as there's one girl out there who doesn't know her worth, my work's not done." Naomi nodded. "You know, you changed the way this city talks about justice." Imani smiled. "I didn't change it. I reminded it to listen." Later that night, as she closed the clinic for the last appointment, she walked through the hallway slowly. Her fingers brushed over the mural, the same one painted years ago by neighborhood kids. Truth, grace, healing. She traced her name at the bottom of it. Small and simple, Imani Reed. Then she turned off the lights. The hallway faded into a soft darkness, but the mural still glowed faintly in the moonlight, like it was alive, like truth itself never really went out. Weeks later, her letter found its way into the hands of a 17-year-old girl named Leah Monroe, a high school senior who dreamed of opening a youth shelter, but feared she wasn't strong enough. Her teacher handed her Imani's final letter saying, "This was written by a woman who built something that changed this city. Maybe it'll change you too." Leah read it twice. Then she cried. That night, she started her first business plan and titled it Project Grace, and so the legacy lived on. Not through fame or statues, but through hearts lit by courage, through every woman who dared to speak up, every man who learned humility, every child who grew up believing that truth was worth the wait. Years later, when people spoke of Imani Reed, they didn't start with her pain. They started with her peace. They said she was the woman who taught a city how to heal, the one who proved that justice is not loud, it's lasting, and somewhere, beneath the golden lights of Chicago, her clinic still stood, its doors open, its sign shining quietly in the dark. Reed Community Care, restoring hope, restoring truth. And though she never wanted fame, the world gave her something far better, legacy. Because Imani Reed didn't just change her story, she changed what justice meant for everyone who came after her.